All right, Brent. So we are live. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Brent, we met at a mutual friend's kind of barbecue gathering, and it was fun to have our kids roam around. You've got an incredible entrepreneurial background. Tell us a bit about yourself, and before we jump in.
Yeah, so I don't know where to start. I got my degree in accounting from BYU, and well, I guess going back even farther, my grandpa was an entrepreneur. So my grandpa started a boat dealership. My dad ran the boat dealership. Entrepreneurship's just kind of always been in my blood. So going to school, I was trying to figure out what to do, and I thought accounting sounded like a really hard major that would try test me out. So I did that, and it was really good. Learned a lot more than I ever would have trying to learn accounting outside of school. Worked for the Big Four for a couple years, and I was kind of at my edge of, eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner in my cubicle. So I thought it was time for a change. So my first business was actually a franchise called Freedom Boat Club. And my brother got into it in Florida. And luckily I was able to help him out with some of his accounting. So I knew kind of the numbers and what he was making and what he was doing. So my wife and I thought it would be a good opportunity to pivot and get out of public accounting. So I quit my job, we sold our house and moved from Texas to Virginia. And I'd never been to Virginia before, but decided it would be a good idea to start a business there.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So anyways, moved to Virginia and, bought a bunch of boats and started selling memberships to people. And it was a wild ride. That was about 5 years ago. And it was a really good experience. I learned a ton. Kind of those first few years put me through the school of hard knocks, but we came out on the other side of it. And it's been a really big blessing for our family.
So there's a lot to touch base on, I think, with that. With one, I love that you did accounting because it was hard. It was difficult. I actually failed accounting at the same university, BYU, and I had to hire accounting majors to teach me and tutor me how to get through accounting. So with that though, I love that you started on something you thought would be beneficial for you down the road. Just it goes to show that like you're trying to tackle big things. You had done the numbers and understood the back end of the Freedom Boat Club franchise. And it sounds like that is what made you comfortable with taking a crazy decision and your wife being okay with you moving across the whole family across the country to selling your house, upending up everything. Was there any sort of like, hey, is this the right thing? Or like, hey, I feel pretty confident about this. Or like, was your backstop like, well, I'll just go work for the Big Four again. Like, what was that process like?
Yeah. So, I had my CPA license. I felt pretty comfortable that I could bounce back into public accounting. But the big thing that you said there was being able to have the inside info for my brother's company. That's what let my wife feel okay with the decision, because I had a ton of ideas and none of them sounded good to her, which she's more of the realist in our marriage. So I'm super grateful that I have her. But yeah, that was what gave me the permission from the boss to make the jump and quit the stable job and move cross country.
It's a big decision when you go from corporate America and going into entrepreneurship. And you hinted towards something. Those first couple of years were rough. You went through the gauntlet. You went through school of hard knocks. Like, what can someone expect who's maybe making that same transition? A lot of listeners to this podcast are in corporate America. They've got 5 to 15 years of experience. They got a little bit of money saved up. They're looking to do something. Why was a franchise the right route for you? And what can they expect in those first, 2 years when they make that switch?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So a franchise is a great first business. And for some people, they do it lifelong, right? It's a great business in and of itself. That's why they're able to franchise and be successful at it. But for me, it was a great first business because it was like a business with training wheels, right? It's a business in a box. You have processes, you have systems, you have a product, right? And it's all been vetted through experience of other people. And you just go in and you have to implement it in your local market. So for me, it was a great first business that way. I was young, I was inexperienced as an entrepreneur. and I had an instant support network and people that I could call on and ask questions. And then, yeah, it just takes hard work. Other than that, I think maybe I'm like some other people where I kind of thought I was going to come out of the gate being the golden child and knock it out of the park. But man, we lost some money in those first couple of years, and it was painful. And it's funny, it's the paradox of entrepreneurship, especially starting out. Lost more money than I've ever lost, but I was having more fun than I've ever had. And it was way more enjoyable than what I was doing previous. So it was the paradox, and that's really what got me through it, right? Is I enjoyed it. And if it was strictly money driven, I probably would have thrown in the towel, but because I loved it, we made it through on the other end to where we started becoming profitable and made up, of course, for all of our losses and way more.
Yeah, that's helpful. I would think too, watching your grandpa have a boat company or a boat club, and then a boat dealership, or at least being in the space, right? So that you're comfortable with it. Just because I'm comfortable like being on a boat, but I, wouldn't necessarily know all the ins and outs. And so I'm sure there were a lot of things you had to figure out as you went about. I love that you said franchises are kind of a business for training wheels. It was a nice transition. That was 5 years ago. You've had a lot of change since. So maybe kind of bring us up to speed on your latest acquisition, why you decided to leave, Freedom Boat Club in the hands of someone else, move across the country and move on to the next step.
Yeah. So we hired a general manager for Freedom Boat Club. It grew, I kind of, it continued to grow. So I continued to hire more people until eventually I worked myself out of a job there. I hired a general manager, and then I wasn't really doing much. So, and it was also around the same time that we felt like it would be a good time for us to move back to Utah to get closer to family. And that was more of a family centered decision for us, is to come back out here. And knowing that I didn't have much to do with my company and that I would be bored being, all the way across the country from it, I couldn't even go into the office and just chat with people and waste their time to waste my time. But so I got a couple of buddies from college that have become successful and have different skill sets. And we thought it'd be a cool idea to start a micro private equity firm that specializes in acquiring blue collar companies. So we kind of put our minds together and we found our first deal, and that was a water softener company in Park City. And so we made that acquisition. We closed on it 6 months ago, and we can talk about that a little bit. There was just a lot of opportunities that we saw, and we thought it was there was a lot of upside. So we went for it and got our SBA loan, and now we're running again and having fun.
Having fun. That's the key theme here, Brent. So when I look at a company, a lot of times I'm looking like, hey, if this business stays as is this interesting? Because it's really easy to fall in love with like, oh, I could do this and I could do that and all these growth opportunities. And you forget that sometimes, well, the owner of the business is really smart. He obviously knows the business really well. Why hasn't he done these, right? So some of these growth opportunities are pretty obvious, but maybe he's already tried these. When you were looking at businesses or looking at this one, how do you think about the if the business is as is, or how do you take into consideration the opportunities that exist for that business in terms of just evaluating it?
Yeah, so a couple different things that we saw in this particular company was, there was a long track record. The company had been around for 30 years, and they'd been profitable ever since, the records that we got. So at least a decade. The one of the first things in your question, I had a thought that come to my mind. As an entrepreneur, you have a lot of people that are kind of naysayers, or like, worst case scenario people. And I had a couple of people say like, well, what if it doesn't grow, right? Because as an entrepreneur, I'm just excited about the upside, right? And I think it'd be hard to be an entrepreneur if you weren't excited about the upside. But that's mostly what I focus on, is the upside. So a lot of people are like, well, what if it doesn't? Well, even still, this business, if we just kept it flat, we would have generated twice the cash flow of the bank note, right? So Without growing it even a dollar, we'd be putting money in our pockets. So it was a good investment. And then as far as looking at the upside, this business had a lot of referral. So they hadn't spent a dollar in marketing in like 4 years, and all their revenue was referral based. So for me, coming from a business that I started from scratch and poured literally hundreds of thousands of dollars into marketing, I was like, well, that's a huge opportunity. They're stable revenue and they're not marketing at all. So that was one of the primary things. And then also, just since they've been around for so long, there was a huge customer base that they could reach that they weren't, tapping into.
That's helpful. And it's helpful to understand kind of your thought process. You can get enamored with the upsides of a business and you fall in love with the business. But in reality, sometimes if you take a step back, you're like, well, obviously the owner is not as dumb as I think, right? Like the owner is doing something right, but they've tried a lot of things that maybe haven't worked out. So even if the business stayed as is, it was 2x the debt service that you needed to pay from a cash flow standpoint. So that starts to make sense. Are you in operations day to day, or how did you moved back west for this opportunity? Are you in the day-to-day operations, or do you have a team there?
We have a team there, and I'm in the day-to-day operations so far as decisions need to be made. As far as carrying out the normal functions of the business, we have amazing employees that do that. When we acquired the business, we had 4 employees that we acquired with it, and two of the employees had been there for 15 years. One had been there for 10 years. So just a great team. But one of the main opportunities that we saw was they needed more people. They didn't have the bandwidth to service and touch the people that were interested in their product and service. So since then, in the last 4 or 5 months, we've grown the business from 4 employees to now we have 9 full-time employees. So we're really trying to scale and grow our employee base so that way we can, reach our customers and potential customers better.
That's pretty significant to double in headcount. It can change a lot of the dynamics of a culture in the office, especially with people who've been there a long time. How did you, so in whether it's through due diligence or under that process, you knew you had employees. At what point did you get to meet the employees and they knew you existed? And then at what point, how did that first conversation go as you walk in and you're like, all right, day one, we're your new bosses. Like, how do you smooth that over and go show like, hey, we're here to help. We're here to, reduce the workload that you have and grow this company. How in your jobs are safe. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so we were really lucky. We didn't lose any of the existing employees. And I think it's because we got to spend time with them. The previous owner was great to work with. He let us spend time with the employees before the sale closed, so they knew what was happening. They were involved. And what was encouraging for us is they actually saw it as a benefit to their work environment, because one of the things that we talked about coming in was to implement technology. Their processes were really ancient. They would have, a phone call would come in, they'd write a note, they'd put it in the computer, and then they'd print the piece of paper off from the computer. They'd hand it to the technician, and then it would go in another piece of paper, and then it would go from computer to paper. There was 5 different pieces of paper for one customer as the customer came in. So there was a lot of redundancy and excess work that they were doing just because it was the way they'd always done it. And so they were excited about somebody coming in with fresh eyes to bring some innovation and some technology to help streamline their jobs.
Yeah, you can a lot of times find that with these older businesses or ones that have been around for 30 years. I think it's easy to see those opportunities. It's very difficult to actually implement those, and you're breaking old habits. So even though these employees probably want to make these changes, you're still breaking 10 years of habits or 15 years of habits of what's going. And I would imagine you're just dropping papers left and right. Like you probably had jobs that got missed or jobs that weren't being done correctly, because even with one piece of paper, it's really easy to lose it, let alone 5 pieces of paper per job.
Right. And I assume there was plenty of that. Again, the employees are awesome. They had their methods with different colors, sticky tapes and paper clips and things like that. But Yeah, implementing technology in kind of a paper-based process can be challenging. And one of the things that I've learned is just to go the speed that your employees can handle. Because if we came in and we tried to rip everything up and implement all the new processes at once, I think we would have lost some people. But I'm a big people person, so it's been like a hand-in-hand progression, right? So we implement one thing. How's it going? Oh, it's going well, but this. Okay, well, just take your time. Take as long as you need. Okay, now we got this one down. Okay, we're going to implement another software. Okay, how's it going? This one's great, but we're struggling with this. Okay, take your time. Get comfortable with it. And so just going slow enough to where the employees can
Like they're feeling
adopt it
comfortable
is
with it.
helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And I think sometimes you go in and you're like, I've got this grand idea. I want to make all these changes. I want to run with it. And, ultimately these changes have to still marinate. They have to gel, and they can't just make changes as fast as possible. There's a concept from a book called measure the gain, not the gap. I can't remember the name of the book, but it's measure the gain and not the gap. And basically what you're trying to do is measure how far you've come. So as you might have these 20 different processes that you're trying to cut out to 3 processes, you can't just go out and do it all at once, right? All you're doing is looking at the gap of where you still need to go. But if you look back and you've made a lot of progress, but it's just going to take a lot longer than you think. And that's okay. And just being okay with that. And it sounds like you did this in a really smooth way. You came to the approach of let's help the employees get more of what they get done. Let's help them have more fun here, have a easier time doing their job, and let's give them some support. So everybody likes to be part of a growing company. Growing companies have their own growing pains, but it's a lot better than being a company that's stagnant or that's not growing. Because what do they say is like revenue can cure a lot of problems. Growth can cure a lot of problems. And so it's just more fun to work with a growing company. And so I'd imagine these employees, they've been there for a long time. They're very loyal. You're taking good care of them. They're taking care of you and your investment in your business, and you have an SBA loan. So I know what that means. You've got personal guarantees on there. So it's everybody's working in the same direction. They're all rowing in the same direction.
Yeah. And we've also included our employees in the hiring process. We have a unique hiring process that I've come to love. I learned it from one of my partners. So we have a 4-step hiring process. We run ads on Indeed or KSL or wherever it is, and we invite everybody that applies to a group interview. So everybody, we don't really scan the resumes. We just invite everybody, and we ask them to show up on time and bring a hard copy of their resume. And if they can do those 2 things, then they've at least met one level. And then the group interview, we ask some generic questions, right? It's nothing specific. It's just kind of hypothetical. And we get to know if they can present themselves well, right? And then once we go through the group interview, then we pass them along to the next phase, which is a job shadow. So I actually put them with one of my employees for 2 hours. And then I get the feedback from the employee, hey, can you work well with this person? Do you think this person would fit well with our team? And they, at that point in the interview process, they sign off and say, yeah, we want them, or no, we don't. And then after that, then they sit down in a one-on-one group or one-on-one interview with me. And then I get to do kind of more of the, tell me about this job, tell me about your strengths, tell me about this. And then I'll do a reference check, and then we'll extend a job offer. And so we haven't been, our growth from a headcount perspective has been with really good people. I feel like we've had the opportunity to filter a lot of people and have multiple people approve within the company of if they want them to join the team or not.
Well, you're going to write a textbook on how to do that, because I've never heard of that type of hiring process, but it makes a lot of sense. It makes a ton of sense. And I think you're getting the buy-in of people who are going to be working with them already, and they know what needs to be successful. And they know if, personalities aren't going to gel very early. So it allows you to, maybe prevent some of those problems that could happen 6 months, 12 months down the road before they even happen. So, Brent, I know we're running out of time here. Thanks so much for a few minutes of your time. I love the story of, corporate America, moving across the country, starting a franchise, then moving across the country again, buying another business. Like, do you see yourself buying more businesses? Is this a portfolio in your micro private equity that you're doing, or where do you see this going?
Yeah, that's the idea. So kind of the genesis is to have a micro PE firm that invests in blue collar companies. So micro typically means under 5 million in acquisition value. And then we want to specialize in blue collar. So whatever it is within that space. And we want to continue to acquire companies either 100% or from an investment standpoint, we want to continue to go out and to find these good opportunities.
That's awesome, Brent. If someone has a business they want to sell or want to follow you online, where can they find you or see what you're up to?
Yeah. So, I mean, just Brent Parker on LinkedIn, or I can even give my email address out there if anybody wants to reach out, because I always love talking about business and connecting and helping people. It's one of those, I guess, passions of mine is business entrepreneurship, talking to people, coaching people. But yeah, BrentLParker@gmail.com as well. So
with final question for you. You made the switch, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of stress. You made the switch from corporate America to moving across the country, starting your own business, losing money for a while. Was it worth it?
Oh yeah. Like it was worth it even when I was losing money, which is the scary thing. So, but now that the money is made sense, it's nice. My wife at least sleeps easy at night now. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Brent, for a few minutes of your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.